Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hey guys, welcome to Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're here with Andrew. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm a second year Theology and Religion student at Trinity.
Nice. And today we're going to be talking about writing a personal statement for theology and religion. So, Andrew, to hit it off, what topics could you include in a theology and religion personal statement?
I think it's really, you can just kind of go with anything to do with theology, really, or for theology and religion, like anything to do with the study of religion. So I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about picking anything in particular. There aren't specific topics that they like look out for or think are better than others. It's more just about something that you're interested in and are prepared to do some actual research and reading about. um, I mean, bear in mind that this is something that if you get to the interview stage, you're going to have to talk about. It's not just writing it down. You're going to have to actually think and talk about it. And so it definitely helps to do something that you're actually want to talk about.
Nice. And am I right in saying that theology and religion is that the course is with the addition of religion that is broadened out of Christianity, that there's multiple religions that you learn about within the degree?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think that there are lots of Christian papers, and the course is still probably got a fair bit of a hangover from when it was just Christian stuff. But there's definitely a massive effort in the department to really diversify it. In your first year, you do a paper called Religion and Religions, which is basically study of religion. So that'll be stuff like defining what religion actually is as a category, or like psychology of religion or sociology of religion, stuff like that, which is quite different to just like straight Christian doctrine. And then there's also options to do, I think you have to do 2 essays on like a world religion, so like Islam or Hinduism, Buddhism. And then, I mean, once you get into the last 2 years, it opens up massively. This year I'm doing 2 Islam papers. A lot of my friends do the Hinduism papers and the Buddhism papers. You can also do papers on Judaism. So yeah, it's definitely not just one strict rigid thing.
Nice. Just quickly before we move on, as out of interest, what are your 2 papers on Islam?
So I do, I'm doing at the moment, I'm doing Islam in the classical period. So sort of like not like older Islam, starting with, Islamic conquest and Muhammad. And then in the summer, I'll be doing Islam in contemporary society, which is obviously a bit more modern. And yeah, so it covers both halves,
Mm,
really.
nice. Yeah, that sounds interesting. And yeah, especially the modernness of the course to have contemporary Islam. So back to the personal statement. We were talking about this earlier, but I was wondering, what would you say to those prospective students um, who are thinking about topics to write in their personal statement? Should they read into new ideas for their personal statement to include, or should they stick to what they already know?
I mean, I think the way forward is really sticking to what you already know, or like less about maybe what you already know, but something that you've already been interested in and are like, actually willing to read about. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, like I knew a lot of people who thought they wanted to go for like the what they perceived to be the really impressive topics, or what they thought the interviewers wanted to read, basically. But that actually makes it way harder, because you might find that this is actually not what you want to be doing. This is like going to become way more difficult, and ultimately it probably does make it much more difficult to like impressively talk about it. So yeah, I definitely say like stick to general interests that you already have, but then go way deeper into them and actually see where that takes you. And actually, you might find that that actually then takes you to something different. I think that's probably quite common. So I wouldn't try and be too, out of the box.
Nice. And I definitely.
Also,
No, go on. You first.
yeah, sorry. Just one thing I just remembered about sort of topics you can talk about. It doesn't just have to be like general topics of scholarship. I mean, if you've done any sort of like essay competitions or anything like that, like they're definitely worth putting in. I know that Keeb will do a theology and philosophy one, which are open for like prospective people who are applying, not like people at the university. But one thing that's really key, I think, is not to make it sort of like a trophy list. It's not like the personal statement, I don't think it's really meant to be like a list of accolades. It's more about talking about what you're interested in, not like, look at me, I'm really impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say, like, to say if you've done like like an essay competition, if you really include that, to talk about how you found that experience, or what you wrote about in that essay, or what you found interesting
Yeah,
about that topic?
definitely. So that's the way to do it, I think. It's like, don't just say I did this. Say this is what I wrote about, and this. I mean, I did that. I did an essay thing at school, and it ended up being the essay I submitted. And I said I talked about it, and this is kind of what I learned doing the essay. And then once I'd done the essay, I kind of thought, well, it led me to read this other stuff. It's much better to talk about it as like a sort of experience rather than like something that you win or don't win type thing.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that, with the advice that I've got when I was applying for uni, not in my personal statement. I think with going back to the point that you made before about should you read new stuff that seems impressive, or stick with your interest and actually dive in deeper with that. I think you definitely, if you stick with your interest, you definitely come across a lot more original in your personal statement. And like not to be cliche, but I guess the personal statement is personal. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, exactly. It's much more difficult to try and fake being what you think is like this perfect Oxford candidate than just being your like genuine self and showing what you're interested in. And I mean, also it's quite important to recognize that I think, the tutors know that this is a person applying to university. They're kind of really at the start or towards the start of like a real interest in stuff. So like, they're aware that what you're interested about when you write your personal statement might change by the time you come to uni. And you should also be aware of that. It's just like, just go with the stuff you want to be reading, and actually you'll probably find that links up pretty nicely with what you can write about.
And it definitely make the whole experience of writing the personal statement less of a drag.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the next question, how would you structure the personal statement?
I think there's lots of different ways you can structure it. For me personally, I really tried to like demonstrate a sort of like intellectual journey. I feel like that sounds like quite a weird phrase, but it was basically just writing down like how my thoughts changed. So you might start with saying, well, I read this book, or I read an article or something like that, which then got me thinking about this other stuff. And then I kind of went from there and looked at stuff like that. And then it just kind of builds on itself. I think that worked for me really well because it quite naturally led into like a conversation. But I think, I mean, it's probably perfectly fair to also go for like slightly more detached points. But I think one important thing is not to make it like each point too brief. You want to give each thing like a bit of body to show that you really did it. You didn't just like read the introduction and then move on. I think a big question with personal statements is how much like personal information to include. Personal in the sense of like not academic stuff, more like who you are. For that, I mean, I think you can do it in lots of different ways. I know people who didn't say anything, and that worked perfectly well. I know people who talked about stuff that might not seem especially relevant, like at first glance, but then ends up being quite relevant. For me, I mean, I've grown up in Romania basically my whole life. My mum's Romanian. So for me, that sparked like an interest in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So I put that in because it felt kind of relevant. So on the personal stuff, I think if you think it fits, there's no harm in adding it. But one thing I'd massively avoid is just putting stuff in for filler. Like, here I am, I want to read theology. Here's like, 3/4 of a page, and then at the end, like, you need a couple more words. By the way, I play the flute. Like, I don't think that really achieves much.
Yeah, I think the thing that you added is so directly relevant to the course that I definitely agree that makes sense to add that, because it shows even though it's personal information, but it shows a reason why you want to study this, like a real original reason. So then, like, it's unbelievable, like, couldn't be more relevant. But I do, like, I know in my personal, they say that for Oxbridge, they're into supercurricular activities, and supercurricular, that means the things that you've done in your spare time that are related to the degree that you're applying to, include those. In terms of extracurricular activities, they always say to keep that to a minimum for Oxbridge. So I know the common advice is like maybe a sentence or two or none at all. I didn't end up putting any at all. And I think if you were to not put any extracurricular stuff, unless some people put 2 sentences because the things that they've added shows them a bit of personality in it. The skills are transferable at least to them as a whole candidate. But then some Oxford tutors will still see that as something irrelevant. So I guess it's per case. I personally didn't, but
also a little thing I'd add is like, I think as long as you can draw it in a little bit, that's probably how you make it work. Because I mean, a friend of mine also at Trinity, he talked about his interest in sport, applying for history, and in his interviews, he was telling me, last year about how they ended up asking him about like the role of sport in history. I think it was something along those lines. So I mean, he talked about rugby, and then they brought that into history. So, I mean, if you can kind of tie it together, it's better, I think. But
no, I definitely agree. If you can somehow make it relevant, for sure. I also think that in terms of I've heard other advice, I guess, you're tying towards, or it sounded like you were saying something similar, that in terms of, so you've got 4,000 characters, like a page for the personal statement. Other advice has been either 3 distinct paragraphs, or whether the paragraphs are linked or independent points, or like one big general point that are split into paragraphs but are flowed in between. But I think was yours structured in like 3 paragraphs? Is that the kind of fitting for one personal statement?
I think mine was roughly 3. I think the first and the last were shorter. This kind of had a main body, or actually 4. But the first one was like 2 sentences. So I mean, I think I didn't go for the whole like one big thing, but I also tried to connect the paragraphs a little bit. I like started really broad and then kind of narrowed down onto more specific stuff.
Nice.
So I think that sort of, because I was doing that, like the structure kind of fit in nicely into that. But I mean, I feel like you can do it different ways. It's just got to fit for you, really. Like, I'm not sure I can really sit here and like try and sell the perfect way to do a personal statement. It's just, you've got to think about if it actually fits what you're trying to do. if you're trying to just follow it because like you're not really sure how well it's going to work, then it's probably worth reassessing.
I think anyone else who jibes with the idea of like an overarching theme and then breaking that, going a bit narrow down of each of those points like you did, that definitely makes a lot of sense to me, at least. Well, the next question is about how would you structure the personal statement if you're applying for subtly different courses to other unis? So, say if you're applying for theology and religion at Oxford, but philosophy and theology elsewhere. I think because I know that I think philosophy is probably the closest neighbouring subject to theology. How would you write your personal statement then?
Yeah, no, philosophy is definitely they're coupled a lot of the time. So yeah, I think the best way to fit philosophy and theology together, I think, is probably, especially if you're applying just for straight theology at Oxford, is to not try and set up sort of two halves. It's not like writing two mini personal statements, one for philosophy, one for theology. It's much better in my mind that you like integrate them together. So, I mean, one thought would be like starting off with something in philosophy that you've read or heard of, or something that sparked an interest, and then talking about how that linked into something else in theology. And then actually you end up with something that's probably really impressive, because you're kind of drawing your own links between the two different disciplines, which are obviously connected but not the same, right? And it's much better to try and connect them both together than keep them separate, I think. Especially if, yeah, as I said, like if you're going to go for just theology here, you've obviously got to show why the philosophy also shows like why you're good at theology type thing, you know. You don't want to just make them think that you're just going for the theology because you're not sure if you can do philosophy at Oxford type thing.
I definitely agree that if you're saying applying for philosophy and theology elsewhere, that if you did a personal statement that connected those two disciplines together, that even if you're applying for straight theology, you could sort of pass that off as a pure theology personal statement. Like, would you agree with that?
Definitely. Yeah, as I said, just make sure that there is enough theology. I think it would go down really badly if they just think that you're more about the philosophy. Just linking them. It's not like incredibly difficult to try and link the two. It's actually quite natural in a lot of ways.
In what ways would you say it's natural? Like in what areas in theology?
Well, I mean, there's been massive crossovers between the two. So you could like, I mean, there's no point trying to like draw too harsh a line. Like, if you're looking for crossovers, you might look at like the influence of Hellenistic thought on early Christianity. There's much more modern stuff. I mean, there's loads of stuff. There's no like real. It's not like you're doing something really crazy or unheard of that's not going to work. It's actually quite natural.
Nice. So for the next question, it's more about resources. What resources exist for further study in theology and religion that could be useful for prospective students to write in their personal statement?
Yeah, there were definitely. I mean, there's a couple that I was thinking of. The first one is, I wouldn't really put it in a personal statement, but it might actually give you a lot of guidance about what to write or how to write it, because it kind of tells you what they want to hear. So it's a video on YouTube, which if you just type in like theology and religion at Oxford, I think it's the first one that comes up, by the head of department, Mary Marshall, and it's really good. I think it was shot at like an open day a couple of years ago. It's kind of like the introductory lecture, and it's only 40, 45, 50 minutes long. And basically it just outlines the course and everything, and then tells you sort of why you should be doing it, which was just quite useful to kind of realize why the tutors think you should be doing theology. Another one I was thinking of was like the open day, but obviously that feels like quite a weird, distant concept at the moment. But I had a quick look at the Oxford like website just so you're really sure about what you're signing up for. It gives you, it's really good. Like it gives you, I think they do it for all the subjects, but like it gives you the breakdown of kind of the whole structure of the course, how the exams work, all of this stuff. And then another thing that I found really, really useful while I was at school is a thing also on YouTube called, it's part of a thing called the Nottingham Timeline Project. But I think the YouTube channel is called like Timeline Theological Videos. They're basically 20, 25-minute videos on like quite big topics or like specific thinkers or a particular idea. And it's like, they're given mainly by professors, I think. So like it's like a really big expert telling you everything in 20 minutes. And they just run you through like an introduction, the main ideas, sort of a bit of biography if it's a particular thinker, kind of just gives you a little overview. So if we're linking it to what we started the video about, it's like if you're really not sure about what to write your personal statement on, might be quite useful to just watch a couple of those. In a couple of hours you've covered quite a lot of ground, and then go from there. They're really, really good. Like they're introductions, but they're quite like solid. They're not wishy-washy. Yeah, I think those are pretty good resources.
Nice. Yeah, they definitely sound really good, especially that last one. And I was wondering more about your personal statement. I was wondering what topics did you write in your personal statement?
So the like broad topic that I talked about was patristics, which is kind of like the early Christian church, like organizing doctrine and stuff, and a lot of church history and stuff. And then I kind of started with quite broad questions that are answered in the patristic period, and then from there went to talk about the like thing. So the essay I mentioned earlier, it was like the subject of the essay is a thing called the Filioque, which is like this old church debate about the like relationships of the like three persons of the Trinity. And yeah, without getting too like bogged down, I just talked about that debate and kind of gave my answer to it that I'd reached in the essay. And that I thought worked quite well because it started a bit broader, then went into like one particular thing that I like found out in my reading, and then also linked it with the essay, which was my submitted work. For that, I chose to submit something and mention it in my personal statement. I know quite a few people don't, and I think that can work too. But for me, it was just quite nice to have the like, give them the essay, but also give them almost like a little introductory bit about sort of why I did the essay and like what I learned from it. Which I think it kind of balances out nicely. If you've got lots of other stuff to write about, then go for that by all means. But I think that can really help. Yeah, that was my one.
Sort of like the behind the scenes context of why you did that essay competition, and which is and just like giving the tutors more reasons of why you want to study this. So yeah,
and also like it kind of without giving like biographical details, it kind of shows them that you're like a real person, you know. You're not just like someone who's because I mean, in their eyes, all they get before they meet you, if you get to interviews, is like a one-page document and an essay, and a report. But like, and I guess the report can flesh out what you're like as a person a bit more. But this is kind of a good way, I think, of showing them that you're a person who's really interested in this. You're not just like bits of paper. You know.
It definitely sounds like, I know, a very original way of going about your personal statement, which is, I guess, the whole point. So yeah, I definitely agree with. I know how you said that how you've gone about your personal statement is not necessarily objectively true, but what suited most for you. So I guess for the people listening, should take those like time theological videos and the other resources, pick out what they're interested in, and take it from there and see where it takes them.
Definitely.
Well, I was just wondering before we finish off, if you could go into a little bit about what is this three persons thing that you wrote about in your personal statement.
So the Filioque is, which I still struggle to pronounce sometimes. Basically, so in the Trinity, so patristics, one of the biggest questions in patristics was how do we sort of structure like who God is, or that, and then the Trinitarian doctrine develops, and then once you have this idea of a Trinity, so Father, Son, and Spirit, how does that sort of fit together? And sort of the main events in patristics, or some of the really big ones, are basically arguments about how the Trinity works and the like qualities of the different figures, and then really big church councils where they kind of decide, well, this is how it is, and they write it into doctrine. And we've inherited that now, and they're kind of the foundations of Christian doctrine. I've got to be really careful here not to make any mistakes in case my cheaters will see this. That's the sort of context of it. And then this was a particular debate which has been credited in part for leading to the schism between the West and the East of the Christian churches. So it's a pretty big deal. And basically they couldn't really agree on how the Spirit related to the other two.
The Father and
the Father and the Son. So basically it's about how the Spirit is sent out, and then there's different ideas about whether it's just the Father, whether the Son's also involved, but then that creates this sort of hierarchy. And I mean, there's a reason why it's still debated. And yeah, to me that was just completely by chance. I just read about it in a book on Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and it seemed like something I want to find out a little bit more about.
A great origin story of how he ended up writing a personal statement. It was great. We'd love to see it. I guess that's a good time to finish off. Thanks, Andrew. That was really interesting. And lots of interesting points. And I've done quite a lot of these personal statement videos, but this one was particularly useful and different to the others. So thank you. And thanks for the viewers for listening in, whether it's on YouTube or your podcasting platforms. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.